This has been impressive today. And again, very balanced as well. Season high from Starling goes right down the gut. Oh, what a follow! Copeland punishing the rim.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Syracuse Basketball Podcast. We're joined today by Dom Chapone, who was on site from the nation's capital in D.C. over the weekend, and Christian de Guzman, the Quadir Copeland of NewsMagician.com. He does a little bit of everything. And I'm your host, as always, James Zuba. We'll get into it here, guys. But Dom, you were down in D.C. this weekend. Before we get into game action, just tell us how was your trip down, and take us inside, Capital One Arena. What were some things that stood out to you about the arena?
It was awesome. So funny story. I've actually never brought this up to anybody, but my first ever men's basketball coverage for News Magician was actually Georgetown last season. So it was kind of a full circle moment. It was exactly almost 365 days later. We were off by one, but was in G-Town. It was awesome. I think the big takeaway, whether you talk to Coach Autry, Coach Cooley, any of the players, any of the fans, whether Syracuse or Georgetown, is how lively that arena felt. I did a story for today, which is Monday, about just like what this rivalry, kind of the state of it is now. And Georgetown, again, their attendance this year for home games is like toward the bottom, not just in the Big East, but just in the entire NCAA. Yeah. And they had triple the amount of fans for this game versus Syracuse compared to the rest of the season on average. So just energy-wise, it was insane. It was pretty much 50-50 Syracuse and Georgetown fans in the stands. We drove down on Friday night, got there, even with the 11:30 tip-off, which I know a lot of us made fun of because I would make fun of it too if it was 11:30 in the morning. It still had a pretty good energy for that. So honestly, that was, I think, just the biggest thing by far. And more importantly, Syracuse got the win, because the 6 hours coming back from DC to Syracuse would have sucked if we got blown out by 30. So there's always that. Yeah,
it sounds like a fun weekend. And, just when you think the sun is set on the bite of the Syracuse-Georgetown rivalry, we get a good game like this. It was a good installment. I wouldn't say it was, as good as maybe some of the Tyus battle games, but Christian, since Syracuse has left the Big East in 2013, I thought this was as good of a game as just about any since Syracuse has left the Big East.
Yeah, it definitely had a little bit of spice to it, and that little scrap that Chris Bell had in the first half also certainly added things. And I think the commentators put it well. It isn't the Syracuse-Georgetown game until someone gets technicals, which was essentially what we got. And I think it's weird because maybe you should have thought that the power of the rivalry should have still continued even with Ewing was under head coach, but because those Georgetown teams were so bad under Ewing, that it really didn't feel that much of a difference in terms of a intense rivalry. And of course, with Boeheim kind of quote unquote falling out of touch with the younger populace of the Syracuse fan base, didn't help things either.
Mildly.
But when you get fresh blood into this rivalry, and both of them, and fresh in terms of Autry hasn't been the head guy, but we know what his history's been here, and Cooley actually being fresh blood into the rivalry. When you get those type of fresh faces into a game like this, and both have a strong desire to continue building the history of this matchup, that can only go to prove that, this should be something that should continue on yearly between both teams. It's one of those that I think is going to be lacking, especially with college football realignment, because there's not really time to set up these great rivalry games in college football. But in college basketball, even if all the realignment stuff happening, there's still plenty of time to schedule these type of historic rivalries and plenty of room in the schedule to set up these grudge matches. And that's what makes college basketball really, really special.
Christian, just to interject real quick, by the way, I didn't realize the power of having coaches, like having a change, how the importance of like having a new coach in charge, as well as just like the confidence and the I guess, morale of a fan base works until, because I was doing the research for like yesterday's story. All the Syracuse Georgetown games from the past few years have all been, except for the past two, were all single digit wins for either Georgetown or Syracuse. Like these were close games. Like there was an OT. The last time Syracuse won in G-Town was an OT win. Every time Georgetown's won, it's been between like 2 and 5 points. Like it's not like these games were like blowouts in either direction. Like even yesterday's game, like Georgetown was pretty much in it up until like the last like 7 to 8 minutes of the second half. Like these were some competitive games. And I think that's one thing I think I learned also was ironically in this landscape of kind of college football realignment, just the end of the regionalists, seeing all the Syracuse fans think in attendance, that just like reminded me of just, I think, what college basketball really is all about. It kind of like maintaining that sense of all these awesome rivalries that older people grew up with, that all of us still grew up with. And I think that's just something special that it's hard to take away when you've got decades worth of history kind of as a solid foundation there.
Yeah, it's a time machine back to the past, back when, Syracuse and Georgetown were founding members of the Big East, and these rivalries were regional, and they were regional for a reason. You had Georgetown getting their talent from Washington, D.C., Syracuse trying to pull from, New York City with St. John's. You had Connecticut coming of age, and then they kind of went to a national recruiting. So it was like all these regional territories where it mattered. Now it's, where we are in college sports, like regionalism is totally gone. It's not about that anymore. But it is interesting, Dom, to your point, like seeing, kind of a CJ Fair, Hakeem Warwick, Arinze Onuaku in the building. Roy Hibbert was there for Georgetown. So seeing all these guys from years past coming in and kind of still feeling a part of this thing, I think that's kind of the importance of the game. The players, it might be a little lost on them. Adrian Autry, as we learned in the post-game press conference, he kind of educated us and said he showed the younger guys some clips. That it's about the guys that have come before you. But yeah, when you got guys like Carmelo who are engaged with it, sending out tweets during the game, that's a really cool thing. We're slated to get a return game next year in Syracuse, so we'll do this thing for at least one more year. Ed Cooley said after the game, and I quote, "As long as I'm the head coach here, I want to play Syracuse every year." So we'll see if they schedule into the future. I think Adrian Autry has voiced publicly that he's interested in that as well. Dom, you had a piece on this go up today. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
It was pretty shocking because usually when you have the press conferences, they're pretty much like back to back, but Autry went first, and then there was like a 15-minute gap in between Autry and Cooley, and Cooley comes in. So Cooley comes in first, like 30 seconds of the presser. He goes, "Hey, like there were some players, this is, by the way, like not verbatim, like just paraphrase, but he's like, oh, there are these some of the players, like they were fired up, very emotional, so I have to calm them down, make sure they're good." Like there was some emotion to him. And then literally, I'll pull up the quote right now. He starts out by going, "I hated seeing all the Syracuse orange in our building." And then within a minute and a half says, "I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to this goddamn game next year." Like that's straight up what he said. Like, so there was definitely an intensity there. I think the one thing also I think we're all both touching on is that when you have Autry and Cooley in charge of both these programs, yet they kind of still bring the new sense of enthusiasm for both fan bases. But like Boeheim and like Ewing, they don't take away the residual and the actual connection to participating in the Big East basketball of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Ewing played in it famously in the mid-80s with Georgetown. Boeheim, the first game that Syracuse played Georgetown was in the, 79 or 80, so it's been decades. Cooley, of course, former Providence coach, years of experience in the Big East, but grew up in the Northeast. And then Autry was, of course, on those teams in the 90s. So there is still that connection there. I kind of what you said, James. I loved Autry's quote of like, yeah, a lot of the younger guys, they didn't really know much about this. So but some of them, he also made the emphasis, which I love, which was with Judah Mintz, for example, of having some of these guys from the DMV area return home. Like they most certainly grew up at the apex of the Big East decades ago. So, I think this definitely there was a lot of emotion on the player side. I think there was a lot of emotion on the coaching side. I think there was definitely that old school style energy in Capital One Arena on kind of the fan basis for both teams.
Yeah, 4 guys on the Syracuse roster from the DMV area. I think that's also part of the exposure and interest in playing the series. Here's what I'll say on the rivalry. As good as, Saturday's game was from a resume standpoint, this game doesn't really help you. I think it's good. It's good for the fans. It's good for television. It's good for eyeballs, ticket sales, and kind of like the prior generations and getting, those kind of guys engaged. I think all that's good, and I think all that's meaningful. From a resume standpoint, just to put it in perspective, Georgetown's currently 231 in the net. It's a quadrant 3 game. It's Syracuse's quote. I mean, I guess if you want to look at it this way, it's the worst win that they have in the quadrant 3. LSU currently sits in, quadrant 4. So I guess it's their second worst win. If you want to look at a win as a bad thing, it's not a bad thing, but it's just how it stacks out on the resume. It's not necessarily a good win. If, we're going to get this return game next year, it doesn't really help Syracuse if they win. And if they lose this game, it only hurts you. So that's kind of the downside of this thing, is that it's not necessarily a game that's going to help you. I think, if Ed Cooley's able to get this thing going at Georgetown, and maybe, Georgetown can be a 100 to maybe even 150 team in the net, then it might be worthwhile of playing. Now, I think everyone agrees, like, this Georgetown game is better than just like playing Bryant or like a UB or Canisius or one of those games.
Yeah, that was going to be my counterpoint.
Yeah, and it just doesn't quite have, the same level. Like, the Cornell and Colgate games, for example, are better from a resume standpoint than Georgetown. It's kind of hard to think that, but that's where we are with where Georgetown basketball is at this point. It's just Cornell and Colgate are more valuable wins.
But the thing is, like, that, like, at the same time, like, who else are you going to schedule in this time period as well? There's not going to be many Power 5 non-conference opponents that you're going to be able to get just in general to come to Syracuse, or for Syracuse to be even willing to travel to a non-Power 5 non-conference game during this time frame in order to get a quote-unquote resume boosting win. At least where Syracuse is right now, you need something like the invitational game at South Dakota next week for Syracuse to get a resume boosting opponent onto their schedule during this time of year. Otherwise, it is going to be a local New York team, a Canisius, a Rochester, Buffalo, Binghamton, whatever. So Syracuse isn't in a position right now to have a Kansas-UConn game like we did a couple weeks ago. Like, that game's not getting scheduled unless there's some sort of sponsorship or tournament tie to it. So you might as well put this game on the schedule during this time slot, because as much as the Syracuse-Georgetown game isn't helping Syracuse's net resume, neither is really a Buffalo or Binghamton win either. Because from what we've seen, Syracuse needs quad 1 wins to get into the tournament. And you're only going to get that in non-conference play from an invitational or something like the Oregon game that's coming up.
Yeah, from an NT. Here's my counter to that, though, Christian. And it doesn't have to be either or. I don't see a reason why you might not be able to play both of these teams. But why wouldn't UConn schedule a Syracuse? I mean, you have Dan Hurley, who, after that Kansas game, he was very vocal. He said, "We'll play anybody. We talk to everybody." They've played North Carolina. They went down to Kansas. They mentioned Duke. Duke's not on their schedule this year, but I think they're interested in getting a Duke game. Why not Syracuse, UConn? I don't see any reason why they couldn't do a home and home with maybe a third game kicker at Madison Square Garden.
I think the only reason why you don't do this now is because you have a fresh head coach who's leading the program. I think you give him a couple years. Give him 5 years to settle into the program. You get his style of basketball underneath him. And then, maybe then you go seeking out those arrangements. But at the same time, Syracuse, I don't think in a position, has, even in these past few years, even before COVID, has been in a position willing to search out for an opponent in the non-conference schedule out of state. Now, that was partially due to the head coach who was at the helm of said program. Because there's, that meme of Boeheim doesn't leave the state of New York until January, which was very, very true. So does that change? Could that change under Autry? Yeah. Is now the right time? Absolutely not. But I do think, yes, Syracuse can be in this position where you get a Power 5 non-con home and home schedule. Definitely now is not the right time. And so
That's
if
fair.
you're going to, in the way the program is situated right now, schedule this Georgetown game.
That's fair. Danny Hurley's got it rolling at UConn. Obviously, it doesn't really bear repeating, but they won the national championship a year ago, and top 25, top 10 team this year. So I think there's a lot of interest from the fan base, at least from that game, for whatever that's worth. Kind of growing up in the mid 2000s as a millennial Syracuse fan growing up. I mean, that was the premier rivalry of Syracuse during the 2000s. You got guys like AJ Price, Hilton Armstrong, Rudy Gay, Jeff Adrian, so on and so forth. That was the rivalry, and obviously the 6 overtime game and all that speaks for itself. But,
and as an aside, it's kind of hard to, especially this time of year, to get fans into the stadium to pack the dome, mainly because one, it's snowing, and two, it's finals week in Syracuse right now. Dom could tell you all about that if he wants to. But like it's finals week in Syracuse right now, and so if you have this game during this weekend against Georgetown, guarantee you a lot of students are going to be wanting to study for finals rather than go out and watch this game. So, or just any game in general. So it's tough to probably attract a crowd during this specific time slot. So if you want to do kind of like that non-conference thing, it's got to be earlier in the year, and which is also not a great idea because that's when you want your tune-up games to be against Canisius and Binghamton.
Now the good news, at least for Christian, kind of on your point with the schedules, at least for next year with scheduling, there won't be a worry about having to block out pretty much 2 weeks because of Maui. So at least like not having the Maui Invitational will give some flexibility. Because one thing that actually kind of sparked my interest, I don't know how possible it would be. I think having a way where it's like, so for the Syracuse UConn connection, like the women's basketball team played UConn an exhibition game like before the season. So there's clearly like a good, at least relation there on that side. It probably extends to the men's side. I wonder if there's a way where you can get like, let's say 2 or 3 teams formerly from the Big East, but are now in other places like the Syracuse and Pitts of the world. And you combine them with like a Georgetown, a UConn, and like the Johnnies, let's say, or a Marquette or somebody else, and kind of find a way to do like a weekend or something like that. Because I will say, at least from the perspective of women's basketball, last season's schedule was pretty much locked down because that was under the old interim coach. But this new schedule was all Leggett Jack. The one thing that stood out was that she cut down the number of these in-state games, like you said. There was only like 2 or 3 on the schedule compared to like last year. There was like 6 or 7, honestly. But the other thing was the diversity of the opponents. Like they played Northern Iowa and Iowa State in a neutral site in Las Vegas. They got Ohio on the road. They got Alabama for the ACC SEC Challenge. Maryland on the road, which is a non-con and a juicy non-con opportunity to get a resume boosting win. So I think maybe that's the model Syracuse can go. It is kind of tough with Georgetown though, because I think the comments on the story I wrote kind of hinted to that point of like, it's like if you win this game, the upside isn't that high. If you lose this game, it's kind of like a blemish. Exactly. And I mean, if I had to kind of pick and choose, I feel like you would probably go like maybe like mid to end November, like kind of around Thanksgiving for this game. I obviously like travel and all that aside, but I think you kind of get the sweet spot of like not too early where it's like an early season dud, but not too late where it kind of is just like either in the middle of the ACC schedule or in this case in middle of December where kind of it's a little bit harder, especially for the students at least on both sides to turn out. Give credit though, I will say give credit to Georgetown's fans. Their students showed up and their fans also showed up. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and Syracuse is scheduled to play in the Legends Classic next year. That'll be next year's MTE with Texas and St. Joseph's. And that game is usually played at the Barclays Center. So Syracuse will return to New York City next year. Not playing it in New York City this year, actually, for the first time in a long time. Don, we'll get into the actual game. Obviously Syracuse wins going away 80-68. I thought the headliner was JJ Starling and the way he played. Mintz was the high point man with 25 points. Obviously Quadir Copeland stepped up off the bench along with Monir Hema. A few things to nitpick at. I mean, I guess the Syracuse shooters struggled a little bit. Justin Taylor did have 6 rebounds, but didn't really score much in this game. Same with Chris Bell. And the defense was lacking a little bit at times. I think Adrian Autry was a little frustrated with maybe the way Naheem McLeod was defending pick and roll action. But Dom, what were some of the big takeaways and what stood out to you from the game?
I think the major one, number one, has got to be Judah Mintz shouldering a lot of the offensive load in that first half, and then in the second half, Quadir Copeland and JJ Starling just completely catching fire. When Starling hit the third three, we can't even lie. Like we were like, the game's over, because he was 3 for 24 from three entering this game, and he went 3 for 3 in this game. Like, that was ridiculous. We saw Copeland's dunk live that y'all heard at the top of the broadcast, and literally I have like reporters like to my left and to my right, and we all have the hands up like that. Like, we were like completely shocked at that. So I think Copeland,
no cheering in the press box, that's a fine.
Yeah, I know. I mean,
that's also fine.
It was hard to do it when Copeland just yammed on somebody. But I would say that because I think Copeland's emergence in the past few games kind of as this like spark plug off the bench. We've talked about numerous times just it can be frustrating, the mistakes he made, like driving into traffic, miscommunications on defense. Like we can go the whole 9 yards on it, but him being a reliable third guard next to Judah and Starling is a pretty big deal, especially because this was the game where Chris Bell finally cooled off and really couldn't get anything going. Georgetown, they were allowing a lot of attacks to the rim, but the one thing they were not doing was giving up threes. Syracuse only shot 11 threes the whole game. Like, they won 5 for 11, but when you're only taking 11, that means that this team is pretty much being like, score inside and basically let the refs make the call. You got to finish around the rim, around our kind of more taller, lankier forwards. So I think that was one takeaway. And then the other one was just Hima's emergence off the bench. Having pretty much, there was a stretch where I think it was Starling, somebody else, and Hima all basically had scores off of offensive rebounds in the end of the first half, just when it looked like Georgetown would come back. And that pretty much saved the game from, instead of Syracuse being up 1, they might be down 5 or 6. And likewise, I think the story is also Naheem only playing 4 minutes, started in the first half, did not start in the second half, and Malik Brown took over for that. And I think the question is now what his role is moving forward, because the Brown minutes at the 5 are getting there. I think Hima, if he can continue to be just a more, at the end of the day, what Autry's looking for in a big is just somebody who could play 10 to 15 minutes and just be a physical presence, whether it's on defense or whether it's with rebounding, or ideally both. If Naheem can't really do that, and Hima's starting to do that, what happens with McLeod? And I think that was another kind of big takeaway, was you just see the changing roles of some of these kind of glue guys we've been talking about all year. And it comes at a fascinating time, just 2 games away from the ACC slate starting. You're kind of still trying to figure out what this rotation will ultimately be.
Yeah, it seemed like a really good defensive game plan from Syracuse's end. They really wanted to get the ball out of the hands of Jaden Epps, and they kind of hard hedged, doubled him, and forced him to give the ball up. But it seemed like the Syracuse staff was really frustrated with the way that McLeod defended, particularly in pick and roll scenarios, ball screens. I think they wanted this, and this is my sense, is I think they wanted him to play in drop coverage when maybe it's not Epps, and play the drive to the basket, but instead he was almost overextending, and then he's getting beat. And it's like, if you're Naheem McLeod, it's much easier at 7'4" to close out on a shooter taking a 15-foot jump shot than it is to come out, overextend, and then try to swivel your hips, turn the other way, and then block a shot at the rim. I specifically remember like one stretch where Brendan Strawn was like motioning his hands, like, no, play back, play in drop coverage. So it was reported, I think either Donna DeToda or Mike Waters would have had it, that he was bothered, his foot was bothering him, I believe. And
just to confirm, Autry also did say that at the press conference at some point, that there was some lower foot injury, and that kind of like was a nagging thing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. And it seems like it's the kind of thing that maybe isn't going to keep him out long term. Maybe that's extrapolating a little bit, but it is interesting with Hima, right? Because he hasn't played much this season. Malik Brown's been that backup center, and it seemed like this was kind of the matchup where Supreme Cook was kind of a bigger body inside, so it was a matchup that was better for Hima. But Christian, as you've kind of watched the center position evolve over the season, it's game by game. But do you expect to see more of Monir Hima going forward?
I think we're going to see a lot more Brown, actually, especially if guys are going to pick and roll a ton. Brown's going to take away the pick and roll because he's the only center on this team with the mobility to keep up with a guard on a switch or
That's
pick
a
and
good
roll,
point.
which is what it seems like the Syracuse defense plan is on pick and rolls. It's toward the center or whoever's getting screened to switch
And it's
onto the
not like
guard.
you're playing much 2-3 zone.
Exactly. So, like, uh, ironically, as we've kind of alluded to, this is a lot in our previous podcast. This would be a great 2-3 zone team just based on having McLeod just sit there underneath the basket, which is probably where he would be best at right now. And just based on the mobility that we've seen, like you said, James, like he just doesn't have the speed or dexterity to keep up with guys who initially are just going to start on the perimeter. And most guys in college basketball, even the forwards that Hemas, that McLeod and Hema are going to be called on to cover, are going to be playing a bit more further up near the perimeter, just based on how modern basketball is. And with more pick and rolls coming, you would assume more pick and rolls are coming. It'll get very easy to just drive past McLeod, especially if Syracuse is going to switch, which it seems like it's going to do. So I think you just got to keep Brown in there and just give up the big guy up front advantage.
I mean, Christian, real quick, this was also the game where pretty much it was man defense or bust because Syracuse had a 20-2 fast break advantage and they forced 14 turnovers. Yeah. But that means that there were way more sets where they were just in the half court kind of already. And I think literally within the first two, it was I think it was the 18:02 marker. There was an out of bounds where and McLeod got taken out instantly, and he only played 4 minutes the entire game. I think when I watched him in person, the one challenge thing is that he always feels like even like at least on the court, like he has the size to block these shots, but he's always like a half second late. Yeah. I don't know if maybe one thing you can do as an adjustment is maybe Autry doesn't start Naheem. You maybe try Brown at the 5 and see how that goes, and then play Naheem with the second unit in kind of a 2-3 look, especially because if you're taking Mintz or Starling out, like at least like that makes up some of the defensive, liabilities for the rest of the guys. But his role is so hard because also he does not do anything offensively, like except for finishing around the rim. It's really hard to get him involved. And we talked about this both in writing and in our previous discussion about the lack of outside shooting on this team, that if he's not going to give you much defensively and he's already offensively very limited, can you really play him more than 10 minutes a game? And I think that's the question Autry's trying to figure out now, because if you can just go with Brown and he can switch on pretty much 1 through 5 and hold up defensively and doesn't kill your offense, and at least Hema can be more active around the basket and with some of these loose balls and just be kind of use his size more to his advantage, and I think that kind of makes the outlook for Naheem look a little bit more. I don't know, James, if you're agreeing or disagreeing, but it kind of makes that outlook a bit more interesting.
It does. And I think, kind of building off your point is that, in like ball screen scenarios, when you have Judah Mintz out there and guys are going to try to do what Syracuse did to Epps, right, is double team Mintz and force him to give the ball up. Well, when you're using the center and ball screens, you feel much more comfortable with Malik Brown maybe catching it at 15 feet and dribbling and making a play than maybe having to give Naheem McLeod the ball there and force him to do something with it. So I just think Malik Brown just gives the offense so much more. But look, I mean, they're going to need Naheem McLeod too. When you get into the ACC, when you go up against North Carolina and Armando Bacot or DJ Burns, our guy at North Carolina, or, even Quentin Post at Boston College, like you're going to need him in those games. It's just, I think he's a little bit better suited on the defensive side as well, just playing zone. So that's what makes it difficult. But
the thing is with McLeod offensively, kind of just to your point as well, is that the guys in the center just need to be, if they're going to play offensively, they've got to be a lot more aggressive in terms of once they get the ball, looking to score immediately. Because if they don't, McLeod and Hema don't have the dribble and dexterity to reposition themselves to get a shot. Right. Even with Brown, even if he catches a ball in the post and the shot is not available, that's where his dribbling can come into at least, and his mobility comes in to at least create some sort of opportunity or shot. So that's the other problem that possesses with McLeod or Hema in the game, is that if you're giving them the ball, the mindset for them has to be, okay, we got to score now, or it's just a waste of 5 seconds on the shot clock.
Yeah, and it's kind of been the qualm with the center position all year. And, if even if you don't want to use those big guys in kind of ball screen scenarios, then they're anchored in the paint and then they're clogging up those driving lanes. So just Malik Brown's able to do so much more, even if he is a little bit more slender on the defensive side. But going back to Syracuse's guard play a little bit in this game, 46 points, Judah Mintz, 25 points. He's 13 of 15 from the free throw line. High point man, but it really seemed like this was kind of the breakout game that we've all been waiting for with J.J. Starling. And, just as we're talking about Chris Bell kind of being that reliable second option as a shooter, a little bit more limited in this game, but it was really the kind of performance that Syracuse needed from J.J. and frankly, maybe the one that some fans have been waiting for.
38 minutes, by the way, out of 40, most on anybody on the team. I think
okay.
in person, what stood out was that, again, I think we finally saw the flashes both of Starling running the offense in the non-Mintz minutes. That's a good way to say that. And also, I think the value of having Mintz, Starling, and Copeland all on the court at the same time to kind of like change the pace and just play a lot more fast compared to like this is the lineup where it's those three guards, Malik, and then either Bell, most likely Bell, but occasionally it was Benny. And I think that was just a good lineup of enough size, enough shooting, kind of like a lot of quickness. Like that was a good amount of athleticism on that team. And I think it's very interesting because ironically we're finding out about this potential like combination now. I like to see how it translates in the ACC because obviously that early part of the ACC schedule gets a little bit brutal. And the one thing with pretty much all of those teams that we play, except for Miami, is they have a lot more size, but they also have kind of those hyper athletic defenders that just make kind of running those tri-guard lineups a little bit more complicated. But I think that was the big thing with Starling was that you finally saw him break out. And it was kind of a little bit of everything. Like he didn't really dominate the stat sheet outside of the scoring, but it was the efficiency. It was the getting a couple just outside looks, especially on the threes too. He was a lot more comfortable like settling into a shot compared to just forcing it. And I think if he could just knock down or at least take like 2 threes a game, maybe splits them just like to keep the defense remotely honest. He was so quick around the baseline, really good protecting the ball, especially in traffic, especially in those lineups where there was another like non-shooter out there for Syracuse. So if this can be the concern has always been like Mintz can clearly score the ball and he'll be 20 points a game the rest of the way. Where are you getting to? How are you adding up to 65 to 70 points to 75 points? Like where is the math? Where are you getting the math from? And if I think Starling being a potential 15 to 20 point guy, that changes what I think we think this Syracuse offense can be. And I think that's just it was a very promising performance, I think, just overall. It's what we were looking for in the Starling Mintz backcourt dating back to when he announced he was coming here.
Yeah, no doubt. And I don't think JJ is going to not necessarily start hitting 3 threes a game. He was a really good shooter in high school at Baldwinsville. Obviously, he injured both of his shoulders at Notre Dame during his freshman year, and I think that's really messed with his shooting motion. And really good piece by Donna Datota, just kind of highlighting that he was kind of in his own head a little bit before Saturday's game, and says he's feeling a little bit more confident now. So we'll see. More to come on that. But Dom, you kind of touched a little bit about that late second half stretch where Judah Mintz went to the bench with 3 fouls. And it seemed kind of inevitable that Georgetown was going to come back and make a run. And, Syracuse was going to have to put Judah Mintz back in to close this thing out. But that didn't necessarily happen. J.J. Starling kind of took over that game, made some big plays. And then Quadir Copeland, too. He had not just the tip slam dunk, but he had another dunk on a handoff and another big drive, kind of a jump stop. And he put it up off the bank and in. I thought for sure Georgetown was going to make a run in that, but those guys really did a good job during that stretch, just kind of keeping them at bay.
Oh yeah, that game did not feel safe until like the last minute and a half or so, because there were stretches where it would be like Syracuse hit like a ridiculous. I think there was a play where actually Starling might have hit a 3 to re-extend lead to like 5 or 8, something like that. And you're just like, okay, Georgetown called timeout. There's immediate timeout. Like they're going to get a score here. It's going to be back to like a 2-basket game. I think the one thing that to give credit to Syracuse to, Georgetown first off was 2 for 14 from 3 in the second half. So that just was not happening at all. Other thing though, honestly, was Georgetown was getting the occasional, like a guy miscommunicated and Cook, let's say, just had an easy slam dunk around the basket. That happened a lot in the second half. Outside of that, though, like minus the miscommunication or two, it honestly was pretty good defense. They forced a lot of turnovers. Getting out in transition pretty much halted any effort at a G-Town comeback. and they held up on the perimeter. And then I'm going to pull up just to make sure I get the stats right, but Epps was 1 from 9 from 3. Ishmael was 1 from 6. Like there was a lot of guys that just for Georgetown couldn't hit anything from the outside. So, and that's honestly a credit to Syracuse playing again, more of that switchy, anybody can kind of switch on any one lineup, and you kind of saw the results there. Georgetown, obviously, we take it with a grain of salt. This is not, again, the Georgetown of old, and they aren't one of the best outside shooting teams or offensive teams in the country. But I think fundamentally we saw kind of, especially in that second half, I think the defense turned up a lot because there was a lot of mistakes in the first half, and I think they just had more. The math was kind of in their favor when you just look at the outside shooting and look at the fast break differentials in favor of Syracuse there.
Yeah, and that's where Copeland's so valuable, right? Because he's a guy that can kind of guard 1 through 3, 1 through 4. He could switch on everything. And in a game like that where you really want to take Epps away, you really need versatile defenders out there who could switch off and guard multiple positions. I thought Syracuse did a really good job on him. I thought it was a really good defensive game plan, and they made it difficult on him, and Epps settled for a couple of those threes. That's why he's 1 for 9. He's taken some shots where he could have gotten to the basket, but instead he settled for 3. But Christian, one of the things about this team that I think is encouraging is that it's a team that's gotten better over the course of the season, and you can kind of see it in real time develop throughout that Georgetown game. But I don't think, Quadir Copeland or J.J. Starling necessarily would have been able to take over a game during a stretch like that. Like, I don't know that Syracuse wins this game without Judah Mintz during that stretch that, maybe even as little as a couple of weeks ago. So I think, is this a team that you think is getting better throughout the course of the season?
It's so tough to say just because of the level of competition that they're playing. Like, again, we might as well bring it back up again. Like, it's not a good Georgetown team, and this is a game that Syracuse should have won by the score it won by. Let's, all frankly be honest. And yeah, the second half is what you probably should have expected Syracuse to do the entire game, and not just only in the second half. And because that first half was a lot closer than I think a lot of people would have liked it to be. So yeah, as much plaudit that you want to give Syracuse for that second half game, this is going to be another one of those games where it's like, we're not going to figure out what this team is really like until we get into the teeth of ACC play, until Syracuse plays a lot of the similar, mid-table ACC teams that we're expected to finish around the 6 to 9 range. And unfortunately, it's kind of like where we were in football, that we don't know what this team is until it faces stiffer competition. We thought Syracuse was a world beater after beating Purdue, and look where that got us now. It got us Apache and Ferraris and the domes. I guess it all worked out. But we don't know what this Syracuse team is, because this Georgetown game, while a promising sign, was not a good sign of what future success can entail.
We'll know more. They play Oregon on Sunday, and I think that's going to be a really important game, and we'll know more. I think this team's growing. I really do. I mean, yeah, to your point, this isn't a very good Georgetown team, but it looked to me as though they were getting a little bit better. We'll see if they can put that together, if they can string together a couple wins. That'll be a tough game Sunday against Oregon in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. But, kind of taking it back to the game, we could talk about the dark side, if you will, with a hat tip to Brent Axe. Not a good game for the Syracuse shooters. Justin Taylor, Chris Bell, both kind of struggled a little bit in this one. And I don't know what's going on with Benny Williams. And I also don't know how he wasn't able to help the team win against Cornell, but he was maybe able to help the team win against Georgetown. Is that the ultimate sign of disrespect to Georgetown?
I mean, Benny did grab a few rebounds. It's so weird how I know he can be frustrating at times, but he is like a big wing who can hit an outside shot and grab a rebound and not at least in theory destroy your team defensively. So I'm still trying to figure out what to do with him, because I think if we're getting
Syracuse is too.
I know. I think we all are, because it's weird, because I think if we're having the conversation of okay, Malik Brown at the 5 is incredibly valuable. You have to fill that spot. And clearly, I think a lesson that we could take away that will maintain itself, I don't think we're going to see a universe in which in one game, Taylor, Bell, and Benny all click from the outside. Bell might get hot. Maybe Taylor can hit a couple threes on another game, but it'll be rare to see all 3 of those guys in the same game just go nuclear. The one I remember vividly was remember last year's Wake Forest the game versus Wake Forest in the ACC tournament where Benny and Bell were like the entire offense. I don't think that's going to happen with this year's team at all, just based off where these three guys are at. I think they could do it on a game or two, but I think that's the biggest challenge with these wings right now is like, and it goes back to Benny. It's like he is such a valuable commodity for this team. He fits a lot of the needs. He checks a lot of the boxes that they're kind of like lacking. And again, missing as much as I don't want to poke the bear again, I think missing Chance Westry again, it's kind of like you're pretty much like dead set on the, if you're not going to go with Benny, then you're pretty much set on the tri-guard lineup, whether that's Taylor at the 3, whether it's Quadir at the 3, whether you go bigger. But I think that's kind of the fundamental question for the Orange right now.
I think that best lineup is when you have a third guard and Malik Brown in the game. Now, it's unquestionably Syracuse's best lineup. And it's tough because if Taylor isn't going to give you the shooting that we know he's capable of, then you might as well put Copeland in and let him do his jack of all trades type of thing.
He can rebound too.
Yeah. So it's really tough. Again, lineup balance is something I thought was going to be a problem in the beginning of the year, and it still kind of feels like it's going to be as we get deeper and deeper into ACC play.
I don't know if it's we obviously don't know like what the deal is with Benny behind the scenes. Like I haven't seen any like major report of like what's going on. If I was like trying to create the ideal rotation, I feel like it would actually make sense to start Benny. But if you don't want to play him that much, you can have Copeland and Taylor as a combo go off the bench, because you can either play them with Minster Starling, number one, but number two, they match each other with Copeland's not a good shooter, but Taylor is. Taylor isn't the best defender. Copeland is. He's at least more of an energetic, more switchable, and they can both rebound. So you kind of like you can kind of like spread out some of your strengths more to those lineups that don't really have it. But I don't know, but like that's again, we don't know if Benny was playing 30 minutes a game right now. This would be a lot more of a easy question to answer than if he was just playing DMPs or 5 to 10 minutes in the last month. So who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, and it's a great point. Like Benny Williams was expected to be a starter coming into the year, but yeah, I mean Justin Taylor and Chris Bell, they both kind of do the same thing. They're a little bit dissimilar, and Justin Taylor is obviously a better rebounder, but Christian, to your point, Quadir Copeland can come in, he can rebound. And then you're kind of mixing and matching skill sets a little bit where, yeah, Dom, to your point, Copeland can come in and be the energy guy and, guard 1 through 4, whoever he's got to guard and do what he's got to do. So it's, I still think, Benny Williams could be utilized by this team. It's just if he's interested in playing basketball, sometimes it just looks like he's completely disinterested out there. But yeah, I mean, there was one instance where Benny had a very clear box out and he was able to kind of rise up and get the rebound, and I think this team could use that going into conference play. I still think they rebounded the ball better coming out of Maui, but I still think it's going to be a concern heading into conference play.
Well, they're about to get a gauntlet of really good rebounding teams when they're playing Pitt twice, one in the Pit of Doom. What is it, Duke, UNC, Miami? Those are all like some of the best rebounding teams in the country. so who knows what's going to happen there?
Yeah, it'll be a tough stretch for sure. I mean, it's this Oregon game coming up. That'll be a difficult one. Obviously, they have that game against Niagara to close out the non-conference schedule. And then you're in a crucial stretch in January. And I think that's a good segue. Looking at this team now, still devoid of a quadrant 1 win. Obviously, 7-3 after that Georgetown game. All 3 losses to ranked teams now. 5 ACC teams are ranked as of Monday. Virginia getting into the mix there, along with Clemson. Miami still hanging tough in the rankings, and then you have Duke in North Carolina. The toughest stretch of Syracuse's schedule is right in the beginning of January, which is usually inverted. You're usually looking at the toughest stretch kind of going into late February and early March. But, this is going to be a critical stretch, kind of, Dom, as you mentioned. 0 quadrant 2 and 0 quadrant 1 wins. Right now, that Oregon game would be quadrant 2. They're 63 in the net. So as that kind of shakes out on neutral courts, it's 1 to 50 is quadrant 1, and then 50 to 100 is quadrant 2. Really critical game. I think it's not a must win, but Syracuse will need at some point, if they want to build an NCAA tournament resume, they're going to have to start winning some of these quadrant 2, quadrant 1 games. But Christian, kind of for you, What are some of the critical things that Syracuse is going to have to do in the early conference play to start building an NCAA tournament resume? No bad losses to this point, but no marquee wins either.
It's kind of the similar theme of what Syracuse needs to do just the entire year, and it's rebound the ball. Just rebound the ball, and it'll be fine. Like, there were some not great looking box outs either in against Georgetown, which is again a team that's
a lost art.
Should have kind of been better at. So, please, that's all I'm asking. Because I think, much like JJ at the beginning of the year, I think, shooting wise, Bell and Taylor just kind of a little bit bad luck wise. So like, I think they'll easily bounce back. Because a lot of the shots I've seen, there weren't too many like awful like back rim or really really front rim or airball shots. A lot of these shots are like very close to, are like in and out shots that are like just not falling. And that was the same thing for JJ when he was struggling. He was taking a lot of shots, and a lot of his layup and drives were just bouncing on the rims and just not getting the right bounce the other way. So I'm not too concerned about the shooting. I'm not too concerned about if JJ struggles again, if he'll have to have another bounce back game or something like that. But pre-pound the damn ball, please.
There's opportunity for boxing. I don't know what happened to boxing out for years. It was, in the zone, there's no box out responsibilities for Syracuse, but maybe I'm getting older because I see a lot of college basketball, and it seems like there's not a
I agree. Like, box out, please. Again, like, well, what did we talk about a couple of weeks ago? Half the team is looking to cherry pick for a transition slam. Like, hello, get the ball first before you turn out field.
Yeah, this team wants to get out and run, and as we kind of mentioned with the fast break points, Dom 20 to 2 edge there, and some steals and some pokeaways and some transition baskets. We know this team wants to do that, and they can do that well. But when it comes to half court defense, you're going to have to close out some stops and rebound the basketball. So we'll see if Syracuse can do that. Dom, as you mentioned, there's some more tougher rebounding opponents on the horizon. I just think I look at the schedule and I think the early stretch, and the cool thing about college basketball is like you're never truly out of the hunt. That's what's great about the conference tournament is that you always have the auto bid there at the end of the season if there isn't a chance for an at-large berth. But when you look at this upcoming schedule in ACC play, and even if you want to include that Oregon game, but you got Pittsburgh at home, and you go on the road at Duke. You have Boston College, and then you're at North Carolina, at Pittsburgh, and then Miami. Those are some key games. All those are top 100 opponents in the net, even Boston College, which is 81. Those are going to be some key games that are going to determine the fate of Syracuse's postseason. And I don't know about you guys, but I think the NCAA tournament would be solidly served to see a guard like Judah Mintz in March Madness.
Well, it definitely raised Mintz's stock. Definitely, it would give him the Malachi Richardson boost probably to get into the first round. Side note: this is a Boston College team that is on the rise after beating Rick Pitino. Oh man, I don't know, but
Slick Rick.
Yeah, I saw that on an article somewhere. It's Boston College on the rise after beating Rick Pitino and St. John's. Hold the brakes on that.
Yeah.
No, they just have Quentin Post.
See, Dutch centers are a good thing to have on your team.
Yeah, but so James, kind of back to real quick to your point. That was it's honestly going to be probably a story I think one of us should probably do is this schedule is so fascinating because Christian, like you usually say, it's usually it's kind of like the football style where you slowly kind of ramp up and then you have some of those like more notable games at the end. And instead, this is like we're pretty much facing, except for UNC and Clemson later in February, we're pretty much playing the brunt of the schedule now. When you just look at it, and it's not only just like the brunt of the schedule, but like UNC and Pitt on the road in back-to-back games, like that's not fun. Like that's not going to be good. The one thing, the ideal I think outcome probably for this team is maybe you can steal one of those pick games by a chance. Like maybe, James, it's the game that you're going to be at, hopefully on December 30th. Maybe they can get a nice win there and maybe beat BC. I'm anticipating that the UNC Pitt on the road is going to be a loss just because it's a brutal environment to play in.
It is.
And I don't think this team is ready for that, to be honest. Like Georgetown was one thing when it's 14,000 people on a Saturday morning, but the Pit of Doom will live up to its name. The question is, I guess, where are the opportunities coming from? The best one, honestly, as much as I don't want to be an anti-homer here, but Miami. Honestly, I think the way they've played recently and being at home for that, I think that's probably the one game in that stretch where, honestly, Miami's biggest weakness at this point has been when any of the starters are in foul trouble, especially kind of in the front court. The rebounding kind of, if you think Syracuse rebounding is bad, Miami's is like equally as bad because they're kind of playing a lot. And also they're not helped by having smaller guards, which I think if you're Mint and Starling being not only bigger offensively in the post and attacking the rim, but defensively stopping those guys, like that can actually be a team where I could see Syracuse upsetting. But the rest of the schedule is a little bit just like, sheesh, like all these opponents, especially their strengths complement or are pretty much in line with what Syracuse's main limitations are, and half of these games are in some of the most brutal environments they will see all year. So it is the winter of uncertainty and the winter of darkness for a little bit.
So can we fly in some MLB spider tack for that Syracuse Miami game so that the ball can actually stick to people's hands and not roll around like butterfingers when they're trying to rebound? Like, good Lord.
Also, remember, this is a Miami team which Syracuse has been tied or had a lead into like the final 5 minutes of the second half in both occasions the past 2 years and has lost both. So there is a world. I actually think it might be the past 3 years, but at the very least, I remember 2. So their recent history says like they will play Miami very close.
At least we won't have to see the Joe Girard, Nigel Pack, who can guard least efficiently. Because boy, was it a breathtaking study of contrast to try and watch those two try and guard each other.
Yeah, those were fun matchups. Syracuse held as large as 18 and I believe even 20 in some games point leads against Miami, only to blow it late.
Because as usual, again, also it's because Syracuse doesn't have an inbound play either.
Yep. Hurricanes fan here. Thank you for some of those victories.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, Dom, as you mentioned, Miami blitzed by Colorado, lost 90-63, looking not unbeatable, looking like they're missing Jordan Miller a little bit on the glass, but. I do think, some of those games early on the road in conference play, you're at Duke on January 2nd, at North Carolina, at Pittsburgh, specifically the Carolina-Pittsburgh. I think those are going to be really tough wins. North Carolina is a little bit battle-tested. They have had an early season, tough, non-conference strength of schedule.
I also saw them real quick in person. They played well versus UConn. I know they lost by 11, but they actually they played them pretty well. And UConn is, of course, where UConn is at now. So, yeah, that's not going to be fun.
Yeah, they did. They've gotten a little bit of their identity back. It looks like, Caleb Love, maybe some addition by subtraction. Elliot Cadeau is kind of a pass-first point guard, and Leaky Black's the guy. And, Armando Bacot struggled a little bit, but Harrison Ingram's looked really good for them. So that's going to be a tough team for Syracuse. I think, of those road games, I think the Duke game is the most winnable game. Duke's lost to Georgia Tech.
What a sentence.
You get them all. The crowd is on winter break. I love it.
The students are home,
Exactly.
But Dom, you're going to be at that game, no?
That will be the next game. The next, I guess, road game I'll be at will be. So I'm covering the what is it? Niagara game. So yeah, I'll be. So I'll be at that the 21st, and after that winter break, and then I'll be hitting the road to Camden. So that'll be a fun environment to be at, regardless of students or not attending. So I'm excited.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I've done 2 games in Cameron, including the 2019 overtime win when Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish were down there. That was quite the game. But
that's awesome.
Certainly an unbelievable environment. So enjoy that.
So you. Oh right, yeah, you were there when Marek got destroyed.
The charge, the Zion charge, which Jim Boeheim still mentions on ACC Network.
Yeah,
still quite impressed with that one. But yeah, that was unbelievable. Just hearing what Syracuse players had to say in the locker room after that one. Elijah Hughes had a good quote. He said, Oh man, I had to call 911 for a second. You know, all these guys had good quotes. Frank Howard said, "I don't know what they're putting in that Slovakian water, man," but he took it. He took that one. So there were some good quotes coming out of the locker room for that play. And shout out Marek, man. He's got some toughness to stand in there and certainly some courage to step in front of Zion.
Ain't that the truth?
But hey, overtime win. Hey, those kinds of plays can decide a game. You know, it looked like it was going to be a poster dunk, and instead it's, you know, follow the other way. So, but yeah, Dom, enjoy that game. That'll be a lot of fun, and you'll be covering the Miami game too in January. So there'll be some good games for you. But
that is my Super Bowl until things completely fall off from there. So very excited.
What your Super Bowl isn't Syracuse USF in the house that Lane Kiffin built?
Lane Kiffin. Oh man. So we'll get out of here on this. But before I do you guys have anything more you want to add? Any other Syracuse basketball notes, news, anything to touch on before we get out of here?
Christian, I have dumped the notebook from the nation's capital, so this is all you.
I got nothing. I was telling James before this, I'm so engrossed in football news right now, just because literally so many things have been happening football-wise. It has literally been only 1 week since the Fair Brown introductory press conference, and literally everything has happened in that week.
New Jersey's got to be a big winner this week, at least for Syracuse.
New Jersey's a great winner this week. Yes, indeed. My master plan is working.
Flipping those 4 stars, a lot of jokes to be made about Garrett Schrader and the Syracuse flips.
So you see, Autry now just has to one up it and has to, now have Ferraris in the dome.
Come on, Adrian.
I mean, that's the one that we got to mention is the Hibachi and Ferraris have got to make a cameo in some capacity for men's basketball. I think that's one thing that we learned.
Yeah, Adrian Autry, what are you doing? Get those recruits from the DMV, get the Hibachi going, get the Ferraris in, do what you got to do, get these guys to commit. That's another component of this Syracuse-Georgetown series where, I think some of it's oversold. Like if recruits out of the DMV area, which is where, Adrian Autry wants to recruit, obviously a key hire in Brendan Strawn, who has team takeover and deep relational ties there. Like, I think Syracuse commits are going to want to commit to Syracuse because they like those guys and think Syracuse can get them to the next level, not necessarily because they're playing in Washington, D.C. But perhaps that's neither here nor there. So with that, we can get out of here. Obviously, Syracuse wins at Georgetown 80-68, and Georgetown goes out sadder than Patrick Mahomes at the referees and at Kadarius Toney for lining up offsides. But for Dom Chapone and Christian de Guzman, I'm James Zuba. Thanks for joining us on the Syracuse Basketball Podcast.
Tony was offside.
Go Orange.